Prototype dropped players into a quarantined New York City in 2009, where they were given unprecedented power to leap over buildings, tear through tanks, shapeshift into enemies, and dismantle the military one limb at a time. Players became Alex Mercer, a mysterious figure infected with a deadly virus and no memory of who he was or why the world wanted him dead. But what many don't know is just how close Prototype came to being killed off entirely. This is the story of a game that almost didn't exist, an overlooked gem that delivered one of the wildest, most unforgettable power trips of its era. The first thing Radical Entertainment had to learn was how to break things. In the early 2000s, the Vancouver-based studio spent years working under the weight of licenses, starting with a tie-in for the Hulk in 2003. The game followed the framework of its film counterpart, but it was the sequel, Hulk Ultimate Destruction, that gave the team real creative space. No longer bound to a movie script, Radical designed a sandbox city filled with destruction and momentum. It was the first time the studio got to build something of their own terms, and it changed everything. Eric Holmes, the lead designer of both Hulk games, spent 5 years refining the systems behind the experience. One of the team's favorite mechanics, charging up an attack by holding a button, came directly from Capcom's Devil May Cry. Holmes remembered it clearly. Both the Hulk 2003 game and Hulk Ultimate Destruction was holding down a button to add power to a move. That was something that was shamelessly inspired by Devil May Cry. In the original DMC games, there was a weapon called the Ifrit Gloves. The Ifrit Gloves was the first game I played, but at least I can remember, which had the hold down power button idea. And I love what they did in that game with it. So you hold down the button, you're going to go further with your blow. You're going to hit harder, and you'll be more powerful. But what defined Ultimate Destruction wasn't just the Hulk's strength. It was how that strength moved through the world. Radical established design pillars that guided every decision. Holmes recalled one of the most important. One of the pillars on there was action on the Richter scale. And if you think about that, that is a really great tool, because it tells you what's in and what's out on so many things. It tells you what sort of levels you're going to have, what sort of mechanical moves you're going to have, and what you're not going to do. Someone would suggest, can we have a mission where Hulk saves a kitten from a tree? And we'd say, well, action on the Richter scale. That rules it out. You can blow up a military base, but the kitten's out. Movement was another pillar, not just speed or agility, but unstoppable movement. Holmes remembered the moment it became real. I can still remember the team meeting where we showed Hulk jumping super high over the city, doing air dashes and then smashing a helicopter in the air, running in software, and there were gasps around the room. Holy crap, we can do that? Oh man, we've got something. The game was fast, wild, and physical, but it was still Hulk. The team locked into a character who could never lie, never infiltrate, never deceive. Holmes described those limits bluntly. Hulk is super bound, like not gonna drive a tank. He's not gonna be subtle. He's not gonna sneak or lie to somebody. He's just going to power through everything. That's what he does. And that was when the question started to shift. What would happen if those limits were gone? What if the player was not a hero? What if there were no boundaries on what they could do or become? Radical briefly explored the idea of creating a game based on the Ultimates, Marvel's modern reboot of the Avengers. But the studio quickly abandoned the pitch. Instead, they began developing a new concept, one that would keep movement and destruction of the Hulk, but apply it to something darker, something without license holders or moral constraints. They called it Prototype. But then an unexpected problem arose: Activision. The first threat to Prototype had nothing to do with design. It was survival. When Activision merged with Vivendi Games in 2008, Radical Entertainment became one of the many studios suddenly forced to justify their existence. At the time, Radical had 4 games in development: Crash Mind Over Mutant, Prototype, and 2 unannounced projects, one of which was a sequel to Scarface, The World Is Yours, and the other, a Jason Bourne adaptation titled Treadstone. Activision had no interest in either. The order came down: cancel what cannot sell. Nearly half the studio was laid off, and the team was told that only 2 projects could remain. For a moment, Prototype stood on the edge of cancellation. What saved it was in a room, a pitch. The remaining team walked executives through the concept of Prototype from the ground up, its art, its mechanics, even the name itself. And at the center of it all was Bobby Kotick. His approval would decide whether the game lived or died. The green light came, but only just. According to Radical's developers, the entire project had become a massive gamble. It was years of work sustained by personal conviction, with the threat of collapse always hanging over their heads. But crisis breeds clarity, and once the team had fought to keep Prototype alive, they decided to build something that broke every rule they had ever worked under. No licenses, no heroes, no moral expectations. They had spent years designing characters who smash things, but this time, they wanted a character who could do anything. That character was Alex Mercer. He was conceived from the beginning as something darker than a hero. Radical's associate producer Jonathan Lim described the game's premise as realism with one impossible twist. A man infected by a deadly virus, stripped of his identity, reshaped into a weapon. Mercer wasn't designed to be aspirational. He was a reflection. The player's actions would define his morality. Eric Holmes, the game's lead designer, explained the intent plainly. We didn't want a Captain America. We didn't want an icon of goodness. We wanted a character the player could project his gameplay values through. Players in open world games are pretty dark people, to be honest. You put someone in a game where there's no repercussions and you can do anything. People will do bad things. Alex does bad things. Holmes saw Mercer as the opposite of everything they had built with the Hulk. Hulk is super bound, like not gonna drive a tank. He's not gonna be subtle. He's not gonna sneak or lie to someone. He's gonna just power through everything. That's what he does. And this was kind of an antidote to that. I was like, wow, well, you could play like the Hulk if you wanted to. You could also be extremely subtle and complicated, and big and small and human, and do all sorts of things we couldn't do. So I think kind of breaking off the chains of the Hulk was an appealing part of that. Suddenly, the things that were off the table were on the table, and that let us, at least conceptually, think of new things to do. Producer Max Ballinger echoed that vision in a more visual way. We want to create the darkest anti-hero character of video games. We want to capture this in his attire and his clothing by also trying to conceal part of his identity. Despite Alex's ability to shapeshift and blend in, the team needed him to be visually distinct. The hoodie became his signature. It offered anonymity, but also a silhouette, a figure that could be feared or ignored, depending on how the player chose to act. Kevin Chu, who led character design, built Mercer's entire appearance around this contradiction. We knew we wanted his jacket to be a darker, almost black color, to allow better blending with the powered forms. By allowing his collared shirt to swap out from his cuffs and collar, we can break up the larger areas of black and reinforce the idea that he dresses like a 35-year-old narcissistic genicist. Mercer was intentionally slim, dressed in dark jeans and fitted leather jacket. The design rejected superhero proportions entirely. Chu explained it as brains over brawn, refined, arrogant, and dangerous. But even then, he worried Mercer might become visually unreadable. With so much dark in his design, I was concerned he would read as a single black blob on screen, so I threw in a white dress shirt to break that up. A dress shirt that would fit Alex Mercer's wardrobe and provide some flair, and the necessary dark light breakup we needed visually. Early iterations of Mercer looked completely different. In the alpha version of the game, he wore a black vest, faded blue jeans, and sneakers. But this design had to be abandoned after the team realized it looked too close to Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed. Mercer was reimagined to strike a balance. He could disappear into a crowd, but the player would never lose him on screen. That same design philosophy extended to his powers. Mercer wasn't supposed to equip gadgets or wield weapons. He was the weapon. Every transformation, blade, claw, hammerfish, shield, or armor, had to feel like it came from within. The virus wasn't a theme, it was the character, Chu explained. Alex really wasn't a person, but rather the virus itself taking the shape of a man. Materials like skin and clothing were all part of the facade, and could be shapeshifted into his blade and claw form. The goal was to avoid anything that felt like traditional gear. The claw had to look like the arm had completely restructured its molecular shape. The blade consumed mass from the arm to become something longer and more lethal. The hammer fist compressed the arm's entire mass into a blunt crushing tool. It was even designed to unfold into fingers, allowing Alex to grab objects while in the form. The blade needed to look large and distinct enough to differentiate it from the claw in terms of perceived usage. I went through bladed weapons in history, the chakram, huzhong, and kama, and applied Alex's viral look to it. He uses the volume in his arm to formulate the blade, which results in his arm losing mass. The shield and the armor forms followed the same rule. They were meant to look like streams of ink or liquid that hardened mid-motion, flexible, fluid, and then suddenly lethal. Even the armored silhouette was inspired by muscle fibers and insect exoskeletons. Chu made sure that the feet stayed small to preserve the parkour-like precision of Alex's movement. He removed the face entirely, because the less human Alex looked, the more terrifying he became. We needed to believe that Alex in this form was still the same man characterized by his dexterous movements. The armor had to look powerful, yet mobile. Removing any semblance of the face made the form more menacing. From these decisions came the final version of Alex Mercer, a protagonist shaped by fear, power, and anonymity. Not a superhero, not a man with a purpose, but something far more unsettling, a weapon pretending to be a man. The next challenge the team faced after defining Alex Mercer was figuring out how to make him actually feel like a one-man army. Movement, power, destruction. None of it would matter if the systems behind him broke under the weight of the promise. From day one, Radical Entertainment knew that gameplay had to be built around Mercer's abilities, not the other way around. And that meant throwing out the old rules of what an open-world game could do. Lead designer Eric Holmes and executive producer Tim Benison both pushed the team to rethink how players would traverse and fight. Coming off Ultimate Destruction, they had already learned how important momentum was. But now, they wanted to go further. Benison explained their top priority. One of the key aspects we focus on getting right with Prototype is the locomotion and agility of Alex Mercer. When you have an ultra-aggressive, fast-moving enemy steamrolling towards you in an open-world recreation of New York City, you simply need to move fast enough and be very agile. Through a combination of AI and animation technology, we're extremely happy with our progress on making Alex move with a kind of hyper-parkour grace. Unlike earlier games that required players to climb objects step by step, Prototype was designed to automate those choices in real time, allowing players to focus on speed, combat, and improvisation. Benison described their new system as reactive and intelligent. What we've tried to do is build into our running system, our parkour system, some artificial intelligence. It actually looks ahead and analyzes the environment as you're running along. It does all sorts of, I guess to use the term, semi-automatic moves. The way he flips over the lip of a wall or around a sign, people see that in their videos and they go, wow. That's one of the most different things about our game compared to a lot of other games this nature. But to reach that fluidity, Radical had to push against the limitations of the previous console generation. They had been capped at 8 enemies on screen in their PS2 era games. But now with the power of newer hardware, they could finally create something bigger, something with more enemies, more destruction, more moving parts. Mercer's movement had to be paired with systems that made the player feel untouchable. And yet the more power they gave him, the harder it became to keep the world feeling grounded. Holmes pointed to one of the team's most complicated design problems: how to balance Mercer's godlike mobility with the expectations of a stealth system. Because we have a character that moves so quick, and sometimes you can just press a button and do this enormously big action that should clearly out you to people. Like just the way Alex jumps is clearly not human, right? But the moment you started doing that around people, if everyone opens fire the moment you do a small, perhaps accidental sprint input, or something like that, it's not fun. So just the connecting of those two things was a real struggle for the team. Getting the social self systems to feel responsive, immersive, and fair became one of the hardest technical tasks in the game. Holmes explained that the damage and chaos were easy. Making a helicopter crash in the Times Square, triggering chain reactions through traffic, was something they could do almost automatically. But stealth, the subtle moments, the crowd reactions, the facial animations, those were harder. Having a helicopter crash into a street smashing into traffic blows up, people run chaotically, car catches fire. Once you've done that once in a systemic sense, it's kind of free after that. And it just works. Whereas subtle up-to-close character interactions and people communicating wasn't. I think we struggled with it. Also, not just struggled with it, we struggled to make it as cool. Because the payoff of someone communicating to you in terms of like, hey, it's that guy, get him. And then maybe you use the Patsy move and wave off with someone else, is not as immediately obviously as cool as Apache gunship crashing into Times Square. Wrapping your head around it, delivering it in a compelling way, and then trying to make it part of a game loop was more uncharted territory for us, and probably lower return on the time spent. But the team had to work hard to make it get where it got to. That tension between chaos and control became the backbone of Prototype's gameplay. According to senior designer Max Bellinger, the core philosophy was always about freedom of choice. The premise behind Prototype's gameplay is liberty of choice. So you can use your attack powers, go full on, bash your way through the obstacles. Or you can use the more subtle mechanics such as consume mechanic to infiltrate, sneak past barricaded areas by consuming and assuming someone's visual identity. Or also evade any of your pursuers by grabbing people in the world and acquiring their appearance as well. Bellinger saw the game not as a linear experience, but as a reactive city filled with content where players could create their own rhythms. We feel we've mastered the technology for an open world, and this is a sandbox we've thrown a bunch of content into. We do not bind the player to play in a particular way. Here you have both the ability to be violent and brutal, as well as being able to be smart and careful. Benison echoed that the goal was to redefine what action could mean, not just louder explosions, but complete control. Basically, we're trying to show gamers something new in the open world game space. Some games use the word revolutionary game experience to describe what amounts to better looking water effects or improved motion of grass. That's not what we think gamers want when it comes to new experiences. We're really pushing hard to redefine the boundaries of what the term action means with this game. The design philosophy carried through to the mission structure as well, because Mercer could change shape at any moment. Every objective had to allow multiple approaches. Prototype will deliver a wide spectrum of gameplay experiences throughout the story or missions. Because Alex can use either his shape-shifting powers at any moment in any mission, players will be able to choose how they wish to complete any mission. The intensity was built to spike and fall, mixing chaos with strategy. Benison described it as alternating between all-out destruction and moments of tactical recon, scouting a location, consuming a target, taking their identity, and launching an ambush. The team designed systems like the analog sprint, which let players build momentum like a car, or the adaptive animation system that made Alex's movement look cinematic, even during the most chaotic sequences. Art director Maurice Kimball said the world itself had to be built around those mechanics. Alex is a product of his environment, and the environment is a product of Alex. So I started to understand from the designers what Alex's capabilities are. That really helped focus our city a little bit more. How tall these buildings are going to be, how far apart they're going to be. Alex is fast, his locomotion is quick, so I wanted to give him some running space. I wanted to give Alex runway usage, because he can also jump very far. I think we pulled it off. The result was a world that could be torn apart in seconds, or studied and infiltrated with precision. Every encounter could be played differently. Every mission could spiral into chaos, or be handled like a scalpel. Prototype wasn't about control, it was about potential. And Radical built every part of the game around what players might choose to become. Alex Mercer wasn't the only problem the team had to figure out. The next one was turning New York City into a war zone. It wasn't just going to be a backdrop, but a living battleground, dynamic, dangerous, and shaped by conflict. This wasn't about building a sandbox. It was about creating a city under siege, where Alex Mercer's story could only make sense surrounded by chaos. Art director Maurice Kimball approached the world like it was a character. New York City itself is a character, and in my view as an art director, it is the main character. Yes, it's a backdrop to the story, but my approach visually is that this is my main character. It's gonna have a character arc. That arc would be one of descent. What began as a recognizable version of Manhattan slowly fell apart. Firebombed streets, collapsing buildings, and infected monsters pouring through the alleyways, while helicopters hunted from above. Radical was determined to make their New York believable, but never literal. Associate producer Jonathan Lim explained that it needed to feel grounded, even as the world tore itself apart. We wanted the game to feel as real as possible, while giving it one fantastical element, which was Alex Mercer and the virus that spreads. We took thousands of pictures of New York. We wanted it to be grime and dirt. We wanted people to feel like they could look at a screenshot of the game and say, wow, that could be real. Senior designer Max Bellinger described the core design goal in even simpler terms. We wanted to capture the true essence of New York City, so our game will feature a lot of density, pedestrians, vehicles, props. And the world had no limit in the sense that the player can go anywhere. New York is not an exact replica of the city, but we wanted to capture a version of it that is believable. Technical art director Russell Hill recalled his disbelief when he heard first what Kimball had in mind for the world. It seemed to me that what he was envisioning was a huge volumetric cloud systems, beams of light filtering from the skies, great contrast in the colors. I sat back and said, this will never happen. But Radical kept pushing. Time and time again, we kept delivering those things. We picked the right elements to erase and say, hey, we can't do that, but we can do a lot of what's in those concepts. That density was more than visual though. It had to serve the gameplay. Radical wanted a world where rooftops held ambushes, where street-level brawls erupted next to military patrols, and where verticality meant more than just a view. A lot of games you can scale to the top of the buildings and that's fine, but what you're going to do when you're up there is not a whole lot, Lim said. In Prototype, you're going to be scaling the top of a 60-story building. There's going to be 3 helicopters on top waiting for you. So not only can you go up there, you can have a lot of gameplay scheduled around the top of the buildings. The result was a city constantly in motion. Radical took over 21,000 photographs and recorded hours of urban sound to get the textures right. We've also been to many different places and recorded the sound of the metropolis, so that with the help of 7.1 surround, you will feel like you're present when you play. In addition to this, we also added a lot of people to the streets. There are not only 21 people living in New York, as some games would have you believe, said Chris Ansel. From a technical standpoint, the world was built to adapt. Lead environment artist Jake Picorni said that the city wasn't just a stage. It had to be something the player learned. You learn the city, you get to know it. You get to know the neighborhoods. There's all these landmarks everywhere, so you start feeling at home eventually, after you've played it for a certain amount of time. So it has that growth like a movie does. You start scared and miss things at the beginning, and then by the end you feel powerful, knowing your neighborhood, knowing your environment, and discovering it. That sense of progression was crucial. Prototype was not a game about collecting things, it was about surviving a 3-sided war. The city had to evolve as the story unfolded, reflecting the spread of the virus, the escalation of Blackwatch tactics, and Alex Mercer's role within the conflict. New York City is the emotional kind of keystone of the game. It's the place we relate to. If the game was set on Mars in the year 3000, and we had a shapeshifter in Mars in the year 3000, I guess you could explain that as a concept, but it all just feels like fantasy. But if we have these fantastic elements taking place in the one place everyone recognizes, you can relate to it, you know it. It's this icon of the world, said Eric Holmes. That relatability was key to grounding a game built around impossible powers. Kimball designed the city's layout around Alex Mercer's capabilities. Tall buildings spaced far enough apart to make jumps feel meaningful, tight corridors for infiltration, and open runways for escape. But Radical wanted more than city blocks. They wanted to show a city breaking down under pressure. That pressure came from two sides. On one, the infected, rapidly mutating, violent, and unpredictable. And on the other, Blackwatch, a faceless military force with endless firepower and no mercy. Mercer was caught in the middle, sometimes hunted, sometimes using one side against the other. Blackwatch was designed to feel inhuman. Character designer Kev Chu explained that the goal was to make the soldiers unreadable, unknowable, and terrifying. I removed the eyes, removed the face, so you don't have that sort of connection to the more human aspects. You can never see the face. You get right away the feeling that you cannot reason with these people. They're almost subhuman, cold, ruthless. They don't have any qualms about taking extreme action to deal with the problem at hand. Their design was based in part on Nazi uniforms from the early 1930s, minimal, imposing, and stripped of humanity. They represented control taken to the furthest edge, and as the story progressed, Blackwatch adapted. They deployed heavier weapons, built fortified zones, and introduced the specialist. Elite enemies designed specifically to match Mercer's evolving power. The developers wanted the player to feel that, even as a walking weapon, Alex could still lose. Prototype was never just about power though. Beneath all the destruction and shapeshifting, Radical was building something else. Something most open world games at the time never dared to try. A mystery. Alex Mercer didn't just wake up with abilities. He woke up with questions. He had no name, no memories, and no idea why the world wanted him dead. That mystery wasn't just background lore, it was the core of the game. From the beginning, Radical's writers and designers wanted the story to be something players would uncover for themselves. We really wanted to build something that the player kind of unraveled as they played the game, said senior designer Dennis Detwiller. And how it started was Eric Holmes, the lead designer, had an idea for a character that could weaponize himself. Him and Tim Benison sat in a room and yelled at each other until he came up with this kind of premise. The result was a conspiracy built from inside out. Players didn't follow mission markers and cutscenes, they hunted the truth. Every power Mercer had was tied to his central ability, to consume people. Not just to become them, but to steal what they knew. Benison described the concept as a new direction for the genre. It's the first time I think that any open world game anyway has done a conspiracy kind of storyline, he explained. There's a lot of mystery about the origin of the character, or about what's even going on, how the character is connected to the events that are happening. And the player, as well as the player character who's called Alex Mercer, go on this journey of discovery. The journey was called the Web of Intrigue. Instead of dumping exposition through long cutscenes, Radical designed a network of characters throughout the city. Individuals who held pieces of the puzzle. When Alex consumed one of them, players would unlock a memory fragment. Sometimes it was a clue, sometimes it was a name, sometimes it was a lie. Alex Mercer can consume anybody he meets in New York City, including key people who know something about his past, Benison said. He doesn't just get their appearance and their biomass from consumption. He gets their memories. And some of these individuals actually know something about his past, actually more than he does. So the player collects these memories. They're visualized as movies within the context of the game, with a very distinctive art style. You have an interface in the game called the Web of Intrigue, where you collect them. It looks like a web of nodes. As you consume more people, other targets become available. You're literally piecing it together. That system let players control the pace of the narrative. They could rush through the campaign or hunt down every thread. There were no forced moral lessons, no guiding voice, just scattered truths hidden in the bodies of people trying to survive. This is a story-driven game that doesn't put constraints on you, said Max Bellinger. You take control of Alex and do whatever you want. Your character evolves depending on what missions you solve, and the story, little by little, becomes clearer to you. Holmes described what he meant at a deeper level. The more people Alex consumed, the more their lives, experiences, and perspective became his own. He wasn't just learning facts, he was absorbing entire human lifetimes. Acquiring all those memories, all these experiences, and all this knowledge, he's becoming smarter than any human has ever been in the history of humanity. Because he's getting lifetimes of experience in his own, at a frantic pace. Within a week, he could have been 100 years. He could have had 1,000 years. But we transform him from something which is a fairly relatable for the player, someone saying what's going on, into someone that's quite brilliant and dark. Closer, I guess, to Hannibal Lecter than the average guy on the street. That transformation gave the story weight. Alex didn't fight Blackwatch or the Infected out of heroism. He hunted them for answers. Every military base he destroyed, every monster he tracked down, was a path to the next memory. He's not just gone out to fight the Infected to fight the Infected. They're linked to him somehow, and he needs to know why, said Detwiller. It's not this altruistic Save New York City story where he's going to stop the military from declaring martial law. That's not even on his radar most of the time. He's a relentless machine, bent on finding out exactly what happened to him. That sense of purpose bled into the gameplay itself. Players could consume people to hide in plain sight, to slip past barricades, or to infiltrate key targets. The ability was both violent and tactical. Mercer could vanish into a disguise just as easily as he could tear someone in half. The premise behind Prototype's gameplay is liberty of choice, Bellinger said. You can use your attack powers, go full on, bash your way through the obstacles, or you can use the more subtle mechanics, such as consume mechanic to infiltrate, sneak past barricaded areas by consuming and assuming someone's visual identity, or also evade any of your pursuers by grabbing people in the world and acquiring their appearance. It wasn't just a mechanic, it was an identity. Alex Mercer wasn't a man trying to save a city. He was something else entirely. A blank slate filled with stolen lives, driven by questions, and capable of becoming anything, except the person he once was. When Prototype launched in June of 2009, it exploded out of the gate. The game topped Steam's global sales charts and became the best-selling title on Xbox 360 that month, moving over 419,000 copies in North America alone. By 2012, Prototype sold more than 2.1 million copies worldwide, an undeniable commercial success for a brand new IP from a mid-sized studio with no franchise legacy to lean on. Critics were impressed by the raw power, fantasy, and momentum of the game. GameSpot described Alex Mercer as an incredibly fun character to play, supported by an intriguing story, and memorable boss battles. But the response wasn't universal. Some reviewers criticized the mission structure for being repetitive, the city visuals for feeling bland, and the narrative for lacking emotional depth. And Prototype's greatest threat wasn't any one critique. It was timing. Just 2 weeks earlier, Infamous had launched, a game with a cleaner aesthetic, a moral choice system, and a more traditional narrative arc. The comparisons were immediate. Where Infamous offered clarity, Prototype embraced chaos. Where one asked players to choose between good and evil, the other let them become the monster. The audience split. Some favored the polished and storytelling of Infamous, and others couldn't get enough of the unhinged violence and freedom that Prototype offered. And the timing only got worse. Grand Theft Auto 4, Assassin's Creed 2, and Batman Arkham Asylum were all dominating the genre. Prototype didn't have an existing universe to lean on. It had no license, no familiar protagonist. For some players, it was just another superpowered game, with a grim lead character in a crumbling city. They didn't realize it was something else entirely. Because Prototype wasn't a superhero game. It was a body horror revenge story, a fever dream of paranoia, government collapse, and viral infection. It didn't ask players to be good. It didn't even ask them to be human. And in 2009, that made it easy to miss, or easier to misunderstand. But Radical knew the risk. Going from established properties like Scarface and the Hulk to something entirely original meant walking into a marketplace without a safety net. But they had plans. DC's Wildstorm division published a tie-in comic. There were early conversations about sequels and spin-offs, so the team believed they had something that could grow. Inside the studio, the energy was ecstatic. We also got addicted to the excitement of adding cool new things. What are we going to add tomorrow? And it's just the crackle of excitement of amazing new things turning up all the time, remembered Eric Holmes. That was magical as a developer. When you get into a groove and things are better than any one person can imagine. Animators producing gold, motion scripting locking in, people getting excited about building encounters. It's just electric. A lot of developers from Radical and Ultimate Destruction have great memories of that. Holmes knew the team, though, didn't always run smooth, but that friction built something better. I think our team was kind of internally described as a dysfunctional family, he said. We didn't always get along, we bumped against each other a fair bit, but the results were really great. We always kind of punched above our weight. We were a relatively small team, and there was a real spirit there, kind of being the underdog. A real desire to constantly push ourselves and outdo ourselves. I think the spirit served us really well. But Prototype did have ambitions that the game could not realize. A co-op multiplayer mode was in early development, but was scrapped during production. We wouldn't be able to pull it off without the same level of quality and polish, admitted executive producer Tim Benison. It was an interesting idea, especially as the game progressed, but we were a single-player open-world action game first and foremost. The loss of that feature stung, but it was the right call, and in its place, Radical delivered a brutal singular vision that gave players something no other game could do, the chance to feel unstoppable. Not everyone understood Prototype. Its story was fragmented, its protagonist was cold, its world was violent and gray, but that was the point. Radical had built a game that threw away the rules of morality, of pacing, of genre, and dared players to become something dangerous. "We wanted to create the darkest anti-hero character of video games," said Max Bellinger. And they did. Alex wasn't just someone to root for. He was someone to fear, someone to become. In the end, Prototype never became the franchise Radical hoped for. Its sequel, Prototype 2, shifted the spotlight to a new lead and delivered refined gameplay. But the studio was already in trouble. Activision shut down Radical Entertainment soon after. The plans for Prototype 3, if they ever made past concept, was never realized. But the original still endures. Because Prototype wasn't just a game, it was a risk, a rejection of neat arcs, a hero's journey, a superpowered scream of frustration and freedom. And for a moment in 2009, that scream was loud enough to cut through everything else. It may be forgotten by some, but for those who remember, Prototype was unforgettable. If you enjoyed this video, please watch this one next, as I'm sure you enjoyed as well.